Hello, Canucks fans, and welcome into episode 153 of the Canucks Speakeasy podcast. I'm Pete.
And I'm Doug.
And I'm Brendan, aka Jabo.
All right, guys, we got a 3-game Eastern Canadian flight to get us going here.
The Canucks found themselves in the nation's capital, Ottawa, and came away with a 5-2 victory. Elias Pettersson had 3 points. Ilya Mikheyev potted 2 goals. And Philip Harona continued his impressive point streak.
The game I don't really want to talk about. I mean, it's good that the Canucks take 2 out of 3 on the road trip, but losing to the Leafs on hockey night always sucks. Suter and Miller with the goals, 5-2 for the bad guys.
And to cap off the road trip, Canucks going to Montreal, win once again 5-2. Casey DeSmith, still undefeated, well, in regulation with the Canucks. I thought it was a tale of 2 games. They finally started going to the net in the second period. Garland, Mikheyev, Joshua, and then Bester and Dietrich at the end of the empty net. So, hey, never a bad thing. 2-1 on an Eastern road trip. Anytime you're above 500 on a road trip is a big thumbs up from this guy.
Yeah, 2-1. I'm okay with that. I mean, it just sucks what the 1 was, but all 5-2 games this week, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, you get 4 out of 6 points on a road trip. You do that, you're gonna make the playoffs if you can keep that up throughout the year. So I'm moderately okay with it. And you're right, the Montreal game was the best of the 3. I thought best effort from the team.
The other interesting thing was every opponent we played was on a back-to-back, the second half of a back-to-back. The Canucks obviously also played a back-to-back when they played Toronto and then Montreal on the Sunday, but Ottawa was on the second half of a back-to-back. Toronto was on the second half of a back-to-back, and then Montreal was too. That was just, I don't remember ever the Canucks going on an Eastern road trip and the 3 opponents were all coming on the second game of a back-to-back.
Just more excuses for people, more excuses.
But it seems to be like it's a weird thing because I've seen it around the league as well that this sort of scheduling seems to be happening. And you see the Canucks come home and they play, obviously, the Islanders, Bo Horvat's return on Wednesday night. And then they go on the road and play the very next night in Calgary. So there's some weird scheduling that we haven't seen. I don't know whether it's trying to create more parity for teams that are on the road, or if this was just, if you look at the way the Canucks have been scheduled on the road this year, where, I believe that was that Toronto Montreal swing was the first back-to-back they've had on the road this year. So I don't know whether that was calculated and input was given by, management or this organization to try to get that put in there to make it a little easier for them because they have to travel so much. But it certainly has helped them make things a little easier, which, you know what? I mean, I'm not going to complain. You got to take that little bit of, I don't know, luck or whatever you want to call it, but you got to take that when you can get it and take advantage of it. And so far, I mean, there are a few games over 500 on the road. So, I mean, really nothing much to complain about.
We're recording this on Tuesday, and between Wednesday and Monday, the Canucks play 4 games, including, like you said, go Vancouver, Calgary, and then back to Vancouver for a couple pretty crucial stretch of games. Well, really, every stretch of games is crucial as we get towards the 20-game mark. Before we get all into it, folks, don't forget you can follow myself on Twitter. I'm at Pete_Gas. The podcast is at Canucks Speak.
You can give me a follow on Twitter at Doug Venn. And be sure to check out our Canucks Speakeasy outro playlist. It's on both Spotify and Apple Music. Another funky jam will be getting added to the playlist at the end of this episode.
And I'm Jabo, JABO_Vancouver. And we're also on YouTube. Like you can go there and see how ugly we all are if you want, I mean, hey, rate us from least hot to the hot. I mean, whatever you want to do. But we are on YouTube, so go there, mash that subscribe button. And yes, obviously we're posting on there every week, maybe in the future more than once a week. So we'll see.
So guys, kind of touched a little bit on that road trip. I think we all agree Montreal was the best game. I was just going to start things off with talking a little bit more about Casey DeSmith, as he got the 2 wins on this road trip. He played 2 of the 3. It just feels really nice to have a very competent backup. I believe he's 4-0-1 now is his record, but it feels really good to have a guy who plays really well coming in and giving a bit of relief for Demko. So for me, that was one of the big takeaways from this road trip. Is it looks like in KC we can trust.
Yeah, I mean he's been solid, and I mean when the team hasn't been solid in front of him, but which I mean it hasn't been a dumpster fire, that's for sure, in front of him. But there have been mistakes. I remember there were a couple of turnovers by Bluger that led to really good scoring chances in the game in Montreal, and DeSmith was solid, and I mean if defensively they can continue to be moderately stingy. I'm not going to say that they've been world beaters defensively, but it's certainly way better than they have been. It puts both goalies in a position to succeed, and it allows your backup to come in, and get positive results. So from that standpoint, I mean, you got to be really, really happy with what you've seen, and I don't, there's no need to shit on like Spencer Martin, because I'd like to think that even Spencer Martin, playing in front of this team, would be, I mean, maybe not on the level of a DeSmith, but certainly better than he was last year. Because, I mean, I don't care who you were. It was extremely difficult to be able to go in there and know that you were going to face 10 to 15 ridiculous high danger scoring chances. Not even just, of some of the kind they've given up this year, but cross crease, and you never know where the shots were coming from. At least now we have some semblance of a little bit of normalcy as to where those shots are going to come from. So, as Tocchet has said on multiple occasions, allow that goalie to be able to focus on half of the ice and not have to focus on both sides and have his head on the swivel for 60 minutes, because no goalie for 60 minutes can do that and be successful over an 82 game schedule.
Yeah, I think one of the big things, and again, it's still pretty early. DeSmith has played 5 games this year, maybe 6.
Yeah, it's 5,
I
think.
5.
Yeah.
5.
But last year was a little bit different because Demko got injured. But the years previous to that, how many times was Demko meant to have the night off, and then the backup gets pulled, and Demko's thrust out there in the second period or in the third period? And it's nice where Demko's actually, when he has a night off, he actually gets a night off. And I think that's one of the reasons why, last year, he had played so much the year before. And last year he had come into training camp with a bit of an injury. He tried to work through it, and then eventually he ended up injuring himself and missed significant time. And, to Spencer Martin's credit, he is a career backup. I don't think he was ever expecting to be thrust into a starting goalie position, and he did the best he could. It was a tire fire last year defensively for this team. But yeah, man, Casey DeSmith deserves a ton of credit, and I think the team is confident with him in the net as well, which speaks volumes, right? And I don't know if you guys caught the interview after the Montreal game, because Casey DeSmith was traded to Montreal, but he never actually played a game for the Canadiens. And then they apparently gave him a jersey, which he said he was going to give to his dad. And the jersey number was 29, which he said was amazing, because for those younger audience members that are listening or watching us on YouTube, that number is retired in Montreal because the great Ken Dryden wore 29, but they gave Casey DeSmith a 29 jersey. And he joked around and said, look, obviously he would have never been able to wear it because of Ken Dryden, but he grew up idolizing Ken Dryden. That's his dad's favorite player of all time. So it's a cool little thing that the Canadiens did for Casey there.
Yeah, I saw that too. Casey DeSmith seems to have a good presence as well. You can tell he's a little bit quirky, just like all goalies are. But I was just kind of quickly looking at a couple of numbers here. They're using Demko DeSmith so far this season on a perfect 2-to-1 ratio. So we're 15 games in. Demko's gotten 10 of them, and DeSmith has gotten 5, which leads you to think this is going to be something around a 50 to 55 start season for Demko, barring any injuries. That helps a lot should this team get into the playoffs. We've seen what Demko can do in the playoffs, and we know what's going to happen if they get in the playoffs. It's going to be the Demko show. DeSmith is going to be there in a backup role. Anything you can do now to kind of think that far down the line. And yeah, I know some people out there are probably saying you can't talk playoffs yet, but look, we said at the 10 game mark. Now people are saying US Thanksgiving. They're saying the 20 game mark. We're 15 games into the season, and the Canucks are still looking like they could be a playoff team this year. But these are things you think about way down the road. Is what can you do now so that you're not pulling Demko off the bench in games? What can you do to lighten his workload? I mean, getting a one game in a 3 game road trip is pretty good, especially when you come away with a 2-1 record. But now you have 4 games in 6 nights. I assume Demko is going to get the night off on the back-to-backs. I don't know if they're going to use them all 3. I know one of those games is against San Jose, so it might be a DeSmith start in there. But anything you can do right now to really think a little bit about load management and think a little bit down the line. And also, I think it shows a lot more confidence with the team. I know you guys have alluded to this too, but the team doesn't play any differently when DeSmith is in net, and I think that's a really good sign as well. And again, the Canucks, like you said, Brendan, they haven't been world beaters defensively. They've had their moments, but it's a huge improvement on last year. They're getting rid of a lot of those cross ice passes a lot better. For the most part, up until the last few games on the road trip, and again, you're the road team, so you don't get the matchups as well with this. They weren't giving up odd man rushes. They gave up quite a few, and a lot of them were just on really errant passes, giving up 2-on-1s and breakaways and whatnot. But for the most part, they've been cutting that out. They've been boxing guys out in their own zone. And I think that helps the goalies as well, but it also instills a lot of confidence in the team and the systems when you could say, hey, we're on the road, our backup goalie's in there, and we can still come away with the W.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like, consistency in your system, right? Consistency in how you play. Doesn't matter who's in net, who should be, or who's in net. I mean, it shouldn't really matter. How you play should be how you play. I mean, that's your identity. That should be your focus. And for the most part, we've seen that. And yeah, I mean, not being world beaters, defensively. Let's make one thing clear. That doesn't mean that they have not been much better, because they have been much better. And I mean, I had some issues with some of their play on this road trip, but again, that in comparison to what I was seeing last year, it's fine, because there were games on this trip where I'm like, I would question whether they would have won them last year. And certainly they are finding their ways to win these games, especially on the road. Road games are very rarely going to be a Picasso, because that the other team's going to be coming hard after you, because they are playing at home. They get last change, so there's a little bit of a disadvantage there, obviously. And really, when they've been playing at home, with the exception, I think there was one game against, I think it was Nashville, where I wasn't too fond of the way they played. I mean, they're finally starting to create that sort of home ice advantage that really hasn't been there in quite a few years, where teams are coming in there and they're expecting the Canucks to really come at them. You saw that again in the game against St. Louis, where they came out of the gates and the shots on goal were 17-2, I think, after the first period. And then that really, I mean, what I thought was a really fantastic performance against Dallas, a team that's right up there, with teams like Vegas and Colorado, in terms of a team that might come out of the West when it's all said and done. So I'll accept road games that aren't perfect, because they rarely are perfect. The goal is to go there and get a result. That is your focus. That's what you want. And, right now there's, I believe, 6-3 on the road right now, if I'm looking at that right? Yeah, 6-3 on the road. And we're looking at, like, that's 2 Easter road swings within the first month of your schedule. That's really difficult. That's very hard. And to come out of that the way they have, I know there's some people who go, their schedule has been easy, but no, I'm sorry. 2 Eastern road trips in your first month, that's not easy. That's difficult.
There's no easy games.
No, exactly, right. And just with the travel, just with that travel, it's very, very hard. And so for them to come out of this segment and this portion of the schedule 6-3 on the road is extremely positive. So they come home, and now the hope is what you do at home is where you really take off, and what they've done really well at being 5-0-1 so far.
Yeah, and even if you go back to that Toronto game, they had a 2-1 lead against the Leafs heading into the second period, and it was just a weird night. There was 2 goals that kind of went in from behind Demko. You know what I mean? Like Nylander scored one where it was just a weird one. It went through his legs and bounced back in. It was just one of those weird nights. And then they definitely got outplayed in the third period. I think Toronto, really kind of put that nail in the coffin when it came to the third period. But even that game that they lost, sure, it's disappointing to lose to Toronto, especially when you're in Toronto. But I thought, at least half that game, they were very competitive and they played very, very well. They had some weird bounces not go their way in that game. And I think, that's sports, right? You got to be good to be lucky. And sometimes the bounces go your way and sometimes they don't. And that game, the bounces didn't really break their way, but I still thought the effort was there. And then again, the very next night, they go into Montreal, which despite how good the Habs are or are not on paper, that stuff still a very tough building to go into. And I thought they dominated. And I think you mentioned this, Pete, that was their best game, beginning their full 60-minute game was that Habs game. And I think, they deserve a lot of credit for that. And then obviously tomorrow is the big game with Horvat's return. And, it's going to be interesting to see how they come out in that game. I'm assuming they're going to want to get a really good start there. But despite losing to Toronto, I thought they looked good for the most part. The third period was a bit of a disappointment, but I mean, sometimes the bounces don't go your way.
Well, a couple of more numbers and things. First of all, with the Islanders game tomorrow, our buddy Juggy is doing the anthems. I'm not sure what Juggy's record is as of late. We'll have to find out, but that could be a big turning point for the game tomorrow. So we'll have to make sure we follow up with him. A couple of other interesting things. So the Canucks are chasing Vegas. Vegas lost tonight to the Capitals. The Canucks could move into a tie with them, and I believe with regulation wins, I believe that's the first tiebreaker that would put the Canucks ahead of Vegas should they actually do that. Now Vegas has played, will have, if Vegas is a 12-2-1 or 12-3-1 record, I believe now, but they've played 12-3-1, and they played 10 games at home already. So they've already got 10 of their 16 at home, a whole bunch of home games in there. Now the Canucks as well, it's important to note 2 other things. They're 5-0-1 at home, which the Canucks have struggled at home. I think, Doug, you were mentioning that. And it feels like as well, there's more of an energy. You've seen this in post games with Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson and some of the other guys mentioning how it's fun to play in the building. So I think I don't know if they said again or finally, but either one is apt. And then another anomaly in the schedule. Actually, before I got one more thing with the Canucks. Canucks are 8-0 right now against the Western Conference. And yes, that does include 3 against the Oilers, but Oilers, a lot of people have thought we're going to be Stanley Cup favorites. And so you do have that. You have a win against Dallas. You have a couple wins against Nashville, who's a middle of the pack team, maybe at best. But hey, you're 8-0 against the West. That's nothing to, take a sniff at there either. One last thing is Kings right behind them. Really weird record with them. 7-0 on the road and 1-3-3 at home. They've only won 1 of their 7 home games, and they've won all 7 on the road. I just thought that was kind of interesting as well. But they've got the perfect split right now of home and road games. It's going to be this next little stretch here. The Canucks do have, it always seems like November, the Canucks have a lot of home games. I'm just looking through the schedule here. They go, it's a pretty good mix for the rest of the month, but this is usually a month where they do play a lot at home. This is a stretch coming up here where I really want to see them utilize that home ice advantage more. Use the Miller line against the other team's top lines. Use your line changes. Use all your home ice advantages, and then on the crowd, I'm really curious to see. As we are now 15 games in, going into game number 16 tomorrow, it's going to be a lot of energy in the building. I know the Larscheiders are going to be in the house tomorrow. Bo Horvat's returning tomorrow. Diwali night. It's going to be a buzz in the air tomorrow, and I really want to see the Canucks and the team be able to start feeding off of this more and more. And I also want to see the fans continue to do this, because how many times have I called out Rogers, especially the lower bowl, for just being like a morgue a lot of the times. There's no energy because there wasn't a lot to get excited about. And when this city gets excited, we actually cheer for the team. We stop turning on each other and we cheer against the other guys. There's a lot of power with that.
I'm just looking at the schedule. You were saying. The Canucks still only have if through November still only have a 4. Look, for the rest of it, it's 4 at home and 4 on the road to end November. It looks like. So it's still they're not. They're going to end this month, and they're going to have banked home games through all of this.
Sorry, Brendan. 9 games left this month, 5 at home. So 5
at home. Okay, so there must be one more past what I'm seeing. So
there's the last the one on the 30th against the Knights at home. That's going to be a big one.
So it's still a fairly even split, considering the amount the Canucks have played on the road. So if you can keep your head above water through that, and be over 500 on the road, it sets you up for later in the year when you will be getting more home games. Just looking at the games. You were watching, especially it started in that Ottawa game. Went into that, but you really started to see teams start to game plan for what the Canucks are doing now, especially in the offensive end. I think the Canucks, especially in Ottawa, started defaulting too much to the point, looking for that point shot, and teams started to converge to the middle of the ice to take that away. And you definitely saw that in Toronto as well. They were more than willing to let the Canucks have the outside, but they're not going to let those point shots through. What I liked in Montreal, specifically after that first period, was they started working it down low, which and you see teams do that to the Canucks now. When the Canucks like to take away that middle of the ice. So what do teams do? They put the puck down low, they get the puck to the net, and they crash. And you started to see that more for the Canucks in that second period in Montreal, which I thought was an important switch in what they were doing. They weren't just defaulting it back to the point and hoping that they would get a point shot through, which I think isn't a bad play if it's spread out with playing other ways, having variety in the offensive end, which I think they, for a time there, it wasn't looking like they were having. So I really liked what I saw in the back half of that Montreal game. It obviously led to the goal from Dakota Joshua, where you basically had 3 guys crashing that net. And when there's 2 defensemen and there's a crashing center, it creates chaos. And when you create chaos, you'll every once in a while you'll have that puck bounce to you, and it did for Joshua. They had chances in the third period. Well, I can't remember who Jake Allen made just a ridiculous save off of that would have put that game away. But, I think that's an important little wrinkle that they're going to have to continue to try to exploit. Get that puck down low, create chaos, and then work the puck, because then that will open up seams up high to get shots through. Because if you're just defaulting to the point all the time, teams know you're going to do that. They just know that's what you're going to do. And so they don't feel there's no discomfort there. So if you start playing that puck down low, get it to the net, crash bodies, make that defense uncomfortable, which I thought they did a better job in Montreal than they did in both Toronto and in Ottawa.
Yeah. Pardon me, guys. I think the next 7 games is actually going to be really crucial for the Canucks. They play 7 games in 11 nights. The first 2 are a back-to-back, and the last 2 are a back-to-back. The good thing is you play the San Jose Sharks twice in there, you play the Seattle Kraken twice in there, and you play the Calgary Flames once. So 4 of those 7 games seem like on paper they should be pretty winnable games. And then you've got the big emotional return of Bo Horvat tomorrow, but it's going to be a crunch. Playing 7 games in 11 nights, that's going to be a crunch, and it's going to be interesting to see how the Canucks come out of that. To me, that's going to be the telltale sign heading into December, is the 7-game stretch.
Yeah, for sure. And this is, again, goes back to goalies, right? It goes back to how they use them. And not just that. One of the other things that's worth really keeping an eye on. Oh, before I get into this, did you guys know the Canucks have a 9-game homestand right at the end of the year? Last 2 games are on the road, and just before that, they have a 9-game homestand. That's I don't think I've ever seen that before.
Yeah, and that's part of why I was saying, if you can hold water, and keep your head above water on the road through these early portions of the season and into the middle of the season, you've got a lot of games at home coming down the stretch. And if the Canucks can continue to turn Rogers Arena into, what I hope is a house of horrors for other teams, which it hasn't been in so long, it puts you in an advantageous position if you are still fighting tooth and nail for a playoff spot.
Yeah, 100%. It goes back to having those games, those home games banked in a way when 9 of your last 11 are home games. Goaltending for me is a big thing in this stretch. The other thing as well is, and we've been seeing this, is the continued secondary scoring. Pius Suter has gotten a little bit hot lately, which is a big boost. I mean, when was the last time we had a third line center scoring goals like he has, which is kind of fantastic to see. But this is something else, especially when you get games where there's a lot of this wacky penalty trouble, and you're going to be then, relying on your third and fourth line for a couple of shifts after killing penalties or on the power plays or whatever. This is something that so far this season the Canucks have got going, and it's little things, but again, these are just contributions that we haven't really seen in the past. Yeah, Dakota Joshua, 5 points in 14 games. Okay. Pius Suter, 4 points in 15 games. Okay. It's not a lot, but these things add up, and the Canucks getting a bunch of these guys who are pacing in the 30 to 40 point range right now. That's something else that for me is going to be really important as you get these longer stretches of games. Maybe you get nights where you want to manage Pettersson's and Hughes's ice time a little bit, which, to be fair, Hughes is still averaging a lot less ice time than last year. I believe last year he averaged over 27, and right now he's hovering right at 24. So they are already trying to do some load management and just and how they do this. And you don't really see any player on the Canucks who's averaging single digits in ice time. I believe Jack Studnicka, just from quickly looking at this, is the lowest player average, and he's just over 10 minutes and 11 seconds of playing time. So that's something else that the coaching staff, I want to applaud them for, is how they're using everybody. Everybody's kind of playing into a role, and you're getting some of this secondary scoring. For me, that's as much as we got Canucks at the top of every statistical category right now, which I just love. I love looking at the NHL stats and seeing Canucks everywhere. A big part of that is having guys in the bottom six also being able to contribute, and we're starting to see that, and we need to continue to see that. So for me, besides the goalies, that's another big wild card, as well as how the Canucks manage not having Carson Soucy for a few games here.
Yeah, injuries are going to play a role here, and not having Soucy, and bringing up Akito Hirose, who, he hasn't been bad by any stretch in Abbotsford, but I don't, having watched the majority of their games, I don't think he stood out necessarily either. The one thing he does bring to the table is an extremely high hockey IQ. The guy thinks the game. And I just think, I think Tocchet was unhappy just the way he came into training camp conditioning wise, which was a legitimate beef, because he's not a big guy. And if you're going to survive at the NHL level, you need to put on weight. It's just the way it is, because the slog of an 82 game schedule and hopefully playoffs, it takes a toll on you. And if you're not the biggest guy in the world and you've got guys leaning on you, the way that NHL players can, it can cause a lot of issues. And yeah, you guys are right. This is a big month for this team, and to be fair, me, the one game at a time guy, I look at every game as an important game. There's no, that statement that Tocchet made out after the Philly game, which was, who are we to think we're anybody? It should be the rallying cry for this team for the entire season. There are still, you got guys media members comparing this team to all sorts of like the 2017-18 Flyers, and then we had the Coyotes of 2021, and
Rick Tocchet coached that team. Rick Tocchet coached that team.
No doubt about it. And so if you want to look at from a straight system point of view, sure, you can make some comparisons there, because obviously they're playing the system that he brought forward. But to the point that you were making, Pete, about third line scoring and fourth line scoring, I think that's the importance of having a system that everybody on the team plays. It's that uniformity, that symmetry within your system, because not only are they scoring, they obviously scored in the down low set in Montreal, but they're also scoring off of the rush. And again, that comes down to symmetry within your system. When you get that puck, when that puck is turned over, whether the first line, second line, third line, fourth line, you're going, and you know where to be, and you know how to get that puck up quickly to create those odd man situations that, that good teams do create. And so the hope is, with that sort of symmetry and consistency, no one's expecting, the third and fourth line to put up a ton of points, but be, slightly consistent, win a game or two here or there, which is what a good team does when they have a good third and fourth line. Every once in a while, that third and fourth line wins you a game. And that's what the Canucks need if they want to, remain consistent.
Yeah. And, I think the bottom six had a guy come back in Teddy Bluger. And I know you mentioned he had a kind of a rough game. It's his first game back.
First game.
Exactly. But I think Bluger's really going to help that bottom six. And, Peace Suter or Pius Suter, Peace, I think is how you're meant to pronounce it. Puce, maybe. He's been great as well. But who's actually really impressed me? And this is
Connor Garland.
Yes, Connor Garland. And I've been very critical of Garland, but to his credit, him and Puce Suter seem to have a bit of chemistry, and Dakota Joshua as well. Like, those three guys have been playing really, really well. And those have kind of been the energy line Tocchet puts out there when the team has kind of been pinned in their own end for a couple of shifts. That's the line he kind of goes to because they're hard on the forecheck. They skate fast. Puce Suter is a great two-way player, and he's putting up points. That line, I think, has been arguably one of their more consistent lines game in, game out on both ends of the ice, defensively and offensively. And Teddy Bluger, I know it wasn't his greatest showing that first game back against Montreal, but the guy was very good in training camp and some of the exhibition games. And I think he's going to be a big help on the bottom six and to the penalty kill as well.
Yeah, it'll be, and I'm glad he's back to have another number 53 out there for Vancouver on Horvat's return. That's going to confuse the hell out of me. I'm glad he said Connor Garland, because I'd actually made a note here about Connor Garland. He might have been the best player, I thought, against Montreal. I thought he had just a fantastic game, and that line was excellent. I thought Joshua might have had his best game as well. And Suter's been slowly kind of cooking and getting going. I've been impressed with him after a bit of a slower start. But that line, yeah, man, they crashed. They got speed. That's if you're getting production out of a third line like that, like we know Connor Garland can get you 10 to 15 goals. Joshua had 11 last year. Suter, I believe, has had a high of 17. It might be even more. So you got three guys who are in the 10 to 20 range on a third line who you can actually use in multiple situations and are fast. They got a bit of speed. They got a bit of size. They got a bit of grit to them. Man, that's what you want out of a third line. If those guys can pace at that, all of them in between 10 and 20 or even 10 and 15 goals, that'd be a huge boon for this team. We haven't had that in so long, man. I would take 10 goals out of all three of them, but I think they'll do better than that. But it's just something that we haven't had for so long. And then Teddy Bluger, rusty, but that's what you want. Not the rust, but that's the kind of guy you want on a fourth line center role. And then you have a rotating cast there of a whole bunch of different guys who can go in with him as well. It's much more useful. All of a sudden, you're using a guy like Anthony Beauvillier on a fourth line, like. That is some depth, and that's not a knock on Beauvillier. He's been all right. He's had a couple of games where he didn't really impress me, but I thought he, again, was on this road trip. I thought he was a lot more noticeable overall. That's depth, though. It's not like, we're not in the days anymore of like the Jason Megmas and everyone coming in and rushing guys up from Abbotsford. And we got Teddy Bluger back, and that meant Niels Hoglander's out, who's actually, he's been a bit streaky, but he's had some good games. And he's still got guys like Niels Amon in the wings, too. It's not like we're now just picking guys up, trading a body for an Adam Clendenning or something and putting them in. There's actually some legitimate depth up front. We're seeing this. I mean, a plus 33 goals differential is top in the league.
Yeah, Tocchet actually brought up at his presser today about guys down in Abbotsford that are digging at the heels of the players at the NHL level, which is exactly what you want. It's a sort of internal competition that we were hoping to see for years, but really haven't seen. We'd seen guys get rushed up to the NHL level, before they necessarily probably were ready. I mean, and a lot of times at their first sign of being, or of playing well. instead of seeing that consistency, which, when people say, should Arshdeep Bains be coming up? And, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point this season he sees NHL action, but I think it's extremely important to keep him down there. And it's not necessarily that at the high end of his talent that he isn't capable of playing at the NHL level. We know by now that's probably the case. The point is to play at that NHL caliber level at the AHL consistently for an entire season or for most of a season. Then you bring him up. And that's really what overcooking your prospects is all about, is building that consistency. So where that coach, this being Jeremy Colton, knows there isn't a game that an Arshdeep Bains or a Niels Oman or, hopefully at some point a Danila Klimovich or hopefully once he gets back a Podkolzin, there isn't a game that you don't know that they're not going to show up and play the exact kind of game that Rick Tocchet wants. And, I heard Tocchet talk about the reason that part of the reason that Hoglander was out was, a couple of crucial mistakes he made in his own end against Toronto that led to a goal. And it's that importance of consistency over 200 feet. I look at another team right now, Buffalo. I mean, that team is chock full of talent and can't keep the puck out of their net, have been able to keep the puck out of their net for a couple of years. And why? Because you've got a dearth of talent that can't play a 200-foot game. And you can't just rely on that. I mean, you can rely on that and maybe to get you through a regular season. But as we know, and seeing a team like Vegas, 200-foot game more often than not is going to win you a Stanley Cup. Guys that aren't capable of doing it, or a team that isn't capable, won't.
Yeah. Quickly on the Buffalo note, Tage Thompson apparently is going to miss some significant time in Buffalo. I don't know if you guys have him for fantasy or your pool.
I do not.
That's another, big blow to Buffalo because they were a team that seemed like they were on the up and up this year. But, we're talking about depth, and I agree with both you guys. Forward depth, there definitely seems to be a ton. It's the defensive depth that I think has some fans a little bit worried. I know they called up, you brought this up, Brendan, that they did make the call to bring up Akita Hirose, and I really like Akita Hirose, but the guy that apparently has been playing lights out down there is Christian Wolanin, but apparently he's kind of banged up at the moment, and that's one of the reasons why I know Tocchet mentioned it was kind of a 50-50 between him and Hirose, but Wolanin apparently he's got banged up, and that's one of the reasons why he wasn't called up, and Hirose got the call over him. But yeah, it's the defensive depth that I'm kind of worried about. I know Myers seems like he's a little banged up at the moment too. We haven't really had an update on Guillaume Brisebois. I know Brisebois is an 8-9 defenseman, NHL caliber defenseman, but he's been injured pretty much since training camp, and there's been very little updates on how he's progressing. Jet Wu, I know you follow Abbotsford much more closely than I do, and I assume more closely than Pete does, Brendan. So you're probably a guy that could speak on this better than we could. But, Jet Wu made some strides, but I don't know how consistent he's been. Cole McWard, who kind of flashed a bit in training camp. I don't know how he's looked down in Abbotsford, but, I think most fans right now, it's the defensive depth. And that's why you're hearing, the Canucks, sniffing around teams like Calgary, who Zadorov wants out, and Tanev, who's a pending UFA. Noah Hannafin. And again, I don't think the Canucks have the assets, or should they move to acquire a player like Hannafin. I just think it's just too much. You're going to have to give up too much to get a guy like him. But, I think that's why you're hearing the Canucks shopping Beauvillier, who is a pending UFA at the end of this year, to try to get some more defensive depth on the back end, because to me, that's the one little flaw in how this team is constructed. And yes, they did address that in this past draft. I mean, you look at Tom Willander playing in the NCAA. Briskevich is still lighting it up in the OHL, which is amazing. 3rd round pick. This guy looks like he should have definitely been late first, early second. So it's nice. There are players coming seemingly, but right now at the NHL, AHL level, I just don't know if they have the depth on the back end. They definitely do up front for the forwards, but it's the back end that I think most Canuck fans are a little worried about.
Yeah, and that's something I think we've all known. And a couple of injuries, all of a sudden you're looking at, geez, you got guys like Ulson and Hirose starting in there, and it really does change the complexion of the team. As Willanen is averaging over a point a game down there, and he's a good call up, and but it is still a little thin. And the Canucks, I'm sure, as the season would go on, would like to add a couple of bodies. I just realized as well, we're like, 40 minutes or so into this, and we've talked a lot of Canucks, and we haven't even talked about like the best players and what they're doing right now. I wanted to just kind of touch a little bit on some of the guys. Pettersson leading the league in points. Hughes leading the league in defenseman scoring. Miller is, I believe, third now in points. Demko is up at the top. Like, these are the four leaders that we're picked out by Talkit at the start of the season and singled out, like, this is your core, these are your leaders. These guys are leading by example, man, and it has been impressive to watch. I don't really think any of them have had a bad game. Maybe a couple of them, like I could think maybe Pettersson and Demko maybe had an off game, but no one's really had a bad game. They're leading by example, and man, it is so much fun just looking at these standings. I mean, even Filip Hronek, man, he's fourth in defenseman scoring right now. I mean, they're all assists, but he's fourth in defenseman scoring. The only defenseman with more points than him are Quinn Hughes, Cale Makar, and Victor Hedman. That's a storyline going into the Islanders game tomorrow. But just at Brock Besser as well. Besser right up in the league leaders in goals. This for me is really fun to watch, and I know everyone talks about regression and sustainability, but when you see that power play out there and the way those guys are playing, I mean, heck, we could have a few really big point scorers at the end of the year should everyone stay healthy and the Canucks keep some sort of regularity with what they're doing.
Just to touch on, Doug, what you were talking about with Abbotsford. I mean, their biggest issue has been defensively. I mean, they're 8-4-1, so you're not going to sit here and say they've been awful because they're 8-4-1, but they're still averaging over 3 goals a game against, and I know that's not what they want to see. They've been in some high scoring games. I mean, they've scored nearly 50, so they're up near 4 goals a game. Score 4, and obvious because when you have Archie Baines near the top of the AHL scoring race. I mean, they started like this last year where defensively they weren't great, and then as the season wore on, they started getting better. And I think in the AHL there are, I mean, yeah, you do cut them some slack because there usually is quite a bit of turnover at the AHL level. Players move on for whatever reason. Different players enter your system. I mean, I don't know if anybody defensively really would, of those young guys, have really jumped out at me as guys that I would be calling up right now, because I think that the decision was either going to be Hirose or Willanen. And Willanen, according to Talkit, was nicked up because I would assume he would have been the guy they called up, but apparently has some sort of an injury. So it'll be interesting to see, because I don't have a ton of issues with the way they're playing, but I am interested to see how much better they can be defensively, because as the year wore on last year, they got much, much better. And the last 2 games against Bakersfield, their last game they got a shutout. So it's slowly starting to get better. They go on the road this weekend, I believe, into Henderson to play the Kings affiliate, and they're a good team as well. So it'll be interesting. I don't know defensively if anybody there has jumped out at me as a guy that I'd be calling up, and that's fine. That's not a bad thing. I mean, a bad thing just in terms of development as a whole, but there might be issues moving forward as injuries hit. Because they're going to. It's inevitable. It's an 82-game season. Somebody's going to get hurt on the back end. Obviously, Soucy already is, and you might having to be going down to your 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th defenseman, as this team has done consistently for the last 5 to 10 years. So, I'll be interested to see how Abbotsford plays over the next couple of weeks. Is this little blip in the way they're playing defensively as they've gotten better? Is that going to be a consistent thing that we see for the next few weeks? And maybe, some of those younger players will, maybe get a chance if injuries do hit in Vancouver.
That's interesting. Yeah. I figured the defense was struggling a little bit just from some of the things I've seen online regarding their games and their outcomes. Just touching on what you were saying, Pete, quickly about the kind of star players. The other guy that has kind of come in guns a-blazing, Ilya Mikheyev. He's fourth on the team in goals this year with 6 goals. I believe he's got 9 points in 11 games. Mikheyev has really, really looked good since coming back. I know, like a lot of guys who missed a lot of time, it takes them a few games to kind of find their stride. But I think Ilya Mikheyev deserves a lot of credit right now because he's been scoring goals at a very good clip and he looks really good. I know some people have been a little bit of disappointed with Kuzmenko this year. I actually think Kuzmenko's been a lot better. He's playing a better 200-foot game, which is definitely something Tocchet wanted from him last year. I know it was great. The guy scored over 40 goals or he had 39 goals or something like that. And that's great. And it doesn't look like he's going to hit that goal number this year, but I think he's a more complete player. And I think Tocchet appreciates that. And he's still just shy a point a game. I believe he's got 13 points in 15 games. So Kuzmenko is still producing points. He's just not getting all those goals like he was last year, but that seems to be spread more towards a Brock Besser, who's having a massive bounce back year goal wise. You've got Mikheyev, who I mentioned, has got 6 goals in 9 games. Obviously, JT Miller, Elias Pettersson, and Quinn Hughes. You know, he's got 5 goals. I think he's 5th on the team in goals scored this year with 5 goals, which is pretty impressive for a defenseman who I didn't think got his second goal until halfway through January last year.
Yeah, he's 5th on the team in goals. With Mikheyev as well, he knows his role, right? Like he knows he's playing on the top line. Kuzmenko knows his role, and I mean, 13 points in 15 games is for Kuzmenko. That's still a 70-point pace, roughly there. Mikheyev knows what he's got to do. He knows he's starting to understand how his line mates work. He's finding the open ice and 6 goals in 11 games. Hey, that's pretty damn good. One other thing about that line, that arguable top line, I think it still is the top line, however you look at it, and Miller is the second line, but they've only taken 1 penalty, the 3 of them through 15 games. They've only taken 1 minor penalty through the first 15 games of the season. I think that's just something worth noting because I know they've drawn a lot of penalties, but they're not taking penalties. And I think that is another thing that they should be celebrated about. Brock Besser's also not taking a penalty this year. So when you have your best players who are staying out of the box as well, that helps you a lot.
Yeah, because they've been talking about Pettersson, I don't know, front runner, but a definite candidate for the Lady Byng, among other. And I mean, I probably, we should add probably, I mean, JT Miller for a potential Selke. Like who? I mean,
yeah.
Who saw that?
And again, I mean, I don't want to say that I saw that, but I certainly thought in the way that he was capable of the way that he plays with the intensity that he plays with, that if you got the right coach in his ear, that he was capable of playing, that sort of tenacious style that you need to play to be good defensively. The attributes were all there. It was the refinement in the way that he was playing that he desperately needed. And a lot of the times you just need the right voice in your ear, because you've watched him for years and you just this guy plays like a power forward. He clearly is an intelligent player. He's no dummy on the ice. And so I as much as I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever see it. I'm like, I didn't quite understand why I couldn't see it, right? Why it wasn't possible. And so, we're only 15 games this year, but they're definitely hitting all of their assignments out of the park. I mean, they've been fantastic, against most of the top lines they've been up against and won those matchups on a consistent basis, which is what you want. I mean, it's not going to happen every night. You are going up against the elite of the elite in the NHL, and sometimes you're going to probably not be as good as you want. But if you can keep your head above water in those matchups, where more often than not they have, that's exactly what you want, because it sets up the rest of your lineup to be able to have success because they're getting the slightly easier matchups. I think one thing we should tell we're almost at the end here. We're almost getting to the end here. So, hey, Bo Horvat. I mean, boo him. Don't boo him. I don't I don't give a flying fuck what you do.
I can't see people booing him. I mean, booing.
I don't know. I
so
personally
lame.
wouldn't. I'd give him a polite clap, because at the end of the day, being a captain of a Canadian team in a Canadian market, and certainly being the captain of a Canadian team during a rebuild, can be not, it's not easy. And I'm not going to sit here and say that he wasn't maybe, part of the problem, but let's be honest, for the last 5 to 7 years, there have been a lot of problems, and certainly not all of them were his. So, and everybody wants to say, oh, the country club atmosphere left with him. I don't know how much that's true. I mean, I'd like to think that if Bo Horvat was still here, this team would still be finding ways to be successful. It just so happens that he's not, and so everybody points to him as the scapegoat as the reason why that's the case, when there were a lot of reasons. So I mean, I'd give him a polite clap and move on with our lives. The more important thing is winning games, not booing your former captain.
Yeah, look, I agree. Like I said, I get it. It's the comments he made last year that I think rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way. I think if those comments were never made, nobody would be booing. The conversation, I agree. I'm not saying I care, but I don't think the conversation, we would even be having a conversation about whether or not we boo Bo. But because he made those comments, I think the fans felt like it was an attack on them. And it felt like I got out of there. Thank God, and, it's nice to be in a playoff race again, because we never really achieved that in Vancouver.
My thoughts on the whole here. We're way too insecure here. Like
I agree. I don't disagree with that. But I think my thought, the things with Bo is, I think, and it's funny because I heard Rick talk about Bo, and it's this weird narrative with Bo. And I think he's been miscast, and he's been miscast his whole career as a two-way player. Bo is not a great defensive forward. He's never been a great defensive forward. If you go back and watch the draft, is the 2013 draft, I think it was, Bob McKenzie says he's Patrice Bergeron light. He's never been a two-way player. He's never been a great penalty killer. He's never been a great two-way player. And I think that's always kind of been miscast. The other thing is, there's a lot of talk and a lot of rhetoric that he never sticks up for his teammates. When there's a big hit, he's always kind of skating away from the scrum. I don't know. Like I said, I get it. Like, it doesn't look good. Optics don't always look good. One of the big things I remember, Bo, is barking at Jake Virtanen at training camp a couple of years ago. We'd never really seen that side with Bo, and I thought that was good. And I think people never saw that personality. And when he spoke up last year post-game for the Islanders, I think it's a lot of the fans were like, well, we never saw that side of him here. Why is he now seemingly taking a shot at us? At the end of the day, it was a business decision, and this management group figured that the better player for this particular group of players long-term is JT Miller. And, whether or not they could have gotten more for Miller or more for Horvat, they made a business decision, and it seemingly turns out to be the better business decision. JT Miller is a better two-way forward. You mentioned this, Brendan. He's debatably up for a Selke Trophy right now. Like, he's probably the front runner. If the season was to end today, it's probably between him and Petey. And we did see flashes of Miller last year when Tocchet came in and Petey, and both of them were getting time on the PK, and they were wanting that more matchup heavy roles. Horvat was never that player. And yes, I will cheer for him. He did the best he could. Bubble Horvat is still a thing, just like Bubble Demko is still a thing.
My picture. Bubble.
Yeah, against the Leafs, against the Blues, pardon me. But yeah, unfortunately, his tenure as the captain of the Vancouver Canucks is marred with very poor asset management and, some short-sighted decisions from the management group at that time. And that kind of held back progress and potential playoff runs for this team of that moment.
I won't boo Bo. I mean, he's the 10th leading scorer all time for the Canucks with a nice, smooth 420 points in the regular season, 420 right there. Former captain through a very difficult era, as you guys mentioned. But it was the right call to trade him, and it was the right move at the time. I think his comments were taken out of context, and I don't have any issue with that. So I'll give them a cheer, but I won't cheer after that because the Canucks are playing them. So I'll give them a good little cheer tomorrow. Just one other thing with Miller and Besser before we take this into the Freeport, guys. There are 2 leading goal scorers, and they're technically our second line. And that's something else when you're going up against the team's best lines. A lot of the nights have your 2 leading goal scorers on that line too. That tells you they're doing something right. Guys, let's take this into the free pour.
All right. I wanted to talk about the premium spirits release that is happening this Saturday across all the BCLs in the Lower Mainland and BC. So every November, there's a premium spirits release of very rare or quasi limited released whiskeys that come out. I picked this one up a couple of years ago. It's the Carchis Lafroig, finished in Pedro Jimenez sherry casks, and it's cask strength, so it's bottled at 58.9%. And I moved out to Tawasin, and there is a liquor store in Richmond that I am going to be camping out at this Saturday/Friday night, Saturday morning, to see if I can pick up a couple of rare whiskeys. One of them on my list is Stag Junior, which is a bourbon. And then there's also the Carchis from Lafroig this year, which I believe is a Madeira and white wine finish. So I'm interested to try that. But yeah, the premium spirits released this weekend. Cheers.
Solange, enjoy that dram there, Doug. For those that can't see, Doug just poured himself a dram. That's a nice looking color there. Whiskey to music for me. I know I talk about music a lot, but I just want to talk about a concert I went to this past week. So I went and saw Lauryn Hill and the Fugees at Rogers Arena, and there'd been a lot of stuff out there about like, oh, she's showing up late. I don't know. Will she even show up? It's Lauryn Hill. She's flaky. Man, it was awesome. She showed up on time. She brought it. Her voice was great. She even made a couple comments about how she'd been having a raspy voice before, but her voice was killer. Had a 20-piece band with her. It was huge, like a full band. They sounded excellent. Backup singers, the whole works. It felt like a very modern, we had a lot of that kind of modern soul feel to it for a lot of it. And then Wyclef Jean came out and they did a bunch of Fugees tracks as well. Great sound, great energy. They had the place going. I'm not usually one for arena shows. I like the more intimate shows, like I'm sure most people do. But this one was very good, well worth it. So I won't be, and I don't have to talk trash about Lauryn Hill or the Fugees because they brought it and they killed it. It was a great show.
All right, so mine is, and so this weekend I saw that on Disney Plus they had the 2023 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductions, and so I had no idea. It's funny, I usually pay real attention to that because I'd see it when it came out. So I went into the show totally blind, which I was actually made the experience that much better because I was like, they kept coming out with who was next. I'm like, oh, no way, that's great. And the one that I was most happy about was George Michael. I'm not going to sit here and say I was a fan of his when I was a kid. I mean, we all enjoy Careless Whisper. It's just a good song. But, you really, and sadly seen a sort of a renaissance for his career, for that we see for a lot of artists after they pass away. George Michael passed away on Christmas Day of 2016. And his best friend, Andrew Ridgely, did the induction. And I really implore you to go watch that. If you want to, induct your best friend, just watch that speech. It was beautiful. It was really, really well done. And, I think too often towards the end of his life, George Michael was remembered for other things that wasn't his music. I mean, obviously his, as Andrew Ridgely has pointed out, his last years weren't his best years. But that shouldn't take away from the fact that this is a guy that sold 150 million albums worldwide, and was, one of the biggest artists of the 80s and 90s. And, for me, even though I didn't always, wasn't always the biggest fan, to me, he's one of the greatest singers of that era, and well deserved to get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I thought. And it was really, again, go listen to Andrew Ridgely's speech. It was beautiful. It was really well done. Something about British people with their ability to use language. And it was one of those speeches you're like, oh, that's written by a British person, because the language is beautiful and it was really well done. And I'm sure if George Michael could hear it, he would have been extremely proud to see his best friend up there inducting him. And it is sad that he wasn't here to see it, because I'm sure no one would have appreciated the accolade more than he would have.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. Episode 153 of the Canucks Speakeasy podcast, just about in the books. Hey, how's that for kind of funny as well? Episode 153, we got Bo Horvat as well in the building tomorrow. Number 53. We talked a lot about Teddy Bluger, number 53. There's our fun with numbers for the day. That's season 5, episode 7, just about in the books. We'll be back next week with a bit of a recap of the busy Canucks schedule coming up here. 4 games in 6 nights. And Doug, you said 7 and 11. Is that right?
Yeah, 7 and 11. The first 2 are back-to-back, and the last 2 are back-to-back.
Amazing. Folks, you can follow us out there if you're not already on Twitter. I'm always going to call it Twitter. I'm Pete_Gas. The podcast is at Canucks Speak.
I'm always going to call it Twitter as well. You can follow me on that platform at Doug Venn. Check out our playlist on Spotify and Apple Music. It's the Canucks Speakeasy outro playlist. This funky jam you're listening to now will be added to the playlist.
And I just won't name it at all. I'm at Jabo, Jabo _Vancouver. We are on YouTube. Go find us. Hit that subscribe button. And I'm waiting tomorrow, because I predict this. Opening puck drop for tomorrow night will be Horvat v. Bluger.
I like it. I hope so too. That keeps our episode 153 keeps helping that out, making us look good. All right, folks. Have a good one. We'll see you next week.